Great. So you've seen the setup. We had a nice discussion in the previous session that pointed right to our session here. You're going to provide all the solutions on how to make money from this vexing problem that people have been concerned about all day, and how much it's going to cost and why you need subsidies. We're going to find out how we can find a set of uses anyway in your industries and from your analysis where we might be able to find profit. That's our mandate. Rose, let's come to you. Holcim is, of course, a major industrial player.
Correct.
One that has a carbon problem, a challenge. In your own approaches, we've heard a little bit on the other stage about the challenges in your industry. How do you see this idea of finding a utilization as a pathway forward?
So it's really important when you're looking at the materials industry to consider that our value chain is not just the carbon side, right? We're talking about that now. Everyone here is a real expert in looking at that value chain. But for us, we need to look at the material side as well. So when we're looking at the full picture of Holcim and when we're going to those FIDs and we're trying to decide, are we going to go ahead with this hundreds of millions, billion-dollar project or not? We must consider what is the opportunity for us on the bottom line. Now, when we look at decarbonized materials, of course, we capture the carbon, we go and we store it, and we have a lovely certificate, and we can sell the fully decarbonated product to a user that has willingness to pay. Great. But there's also the other opportunity. The other opportunity is a revenue opportunity to look at that CO2 as a solution to generate brand new value, brand new products in a whole variety of industries. In fact, not only does that have intrinsic value itself, if the utilization opportunities exist, but it also has value where, for example, we can burn biogenic fuels in our system, and we can sell that CO2 alongside the credits that can make sure that down the chain, many people can benefit from decarbonated CO2 in effect. So utilization becomes a key opportunity. If we can find great novel opportunities to capture and utilize that CO2, both the biogenic fraction and the non-biogenic, we can open up a whole new revenue opportunity to consider when we go to FID.
Now, how theoretical is this? It's a nice concept, but do you have any customers lined up, or do you have a pathway to getting customers?
So customers are an interesting one, right? When it comes to the CO2 side of our customers, we are seeing that there's some intrinsic inability to commit to very, very long-term value chains of when they're going to use the CO2. Earlier, and I believe the last chat, we heard a bit about the ESAF industry and that the benchmarks being set. You go to Madrid and you see all of these big airlines who've got their hubs there saying, yes, we're going to go and we're going to meet these targets. But then you ask them, tell me exactly when you're going to have your utilizing facility up and running and how much of my CO2 you're going to buy. They say, hold on, I'm not ready to make that commitment yet. And that is the same story across multiple different utilization scenarios today. We want more technologies in a mature state for utilization so that that market can evolve.
So it's a chicken and egg problem,
I guess.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you've got your opening statement. So you're hopeful, but I don't know if it's a chicken or egg, or if we're still approaching the farm. But at least we can see the vision of the farm over there somewhere where there might be chickens and eggs. Wilfred, let's turn to you. The other one of the hard to abate or hard to resist industries, if you want to be more positive, you're in the chemicals business.
Yes.
Can you tell us from your perspective the utilization point that we're trying to push on here? Is it something that you see as feasible, or is it impractical? How do you see it?
So I'm coming from LyondellBasell. We are one of the largest producers of polyethylene, polypropylene, propylene oxide in the world.
I hear it's a cracking business.
A steam cracking business, yeah. But it's a very interesting business. Of course, the one which, also is required to grow the world. Yeah. So we have a growth rate in our industry which is above the BIP globally. Of course, Europe has another dynamic than the rest of the world. But okay, what do we see as our main challenges in our industry? I mentioned we are a plastics company, so plastics and plastic waste is one of our biggest challenge. And for that, one of the key elements of our strategy is helping to end plastic waste. The other side, you mentioned the cracker. The steam cracker is a process which is very energy intensive. We have about 23 million tons of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in the world, and 60% of that is coming from steam crackers. So when we do effectively let's say, work against the climate change or work against the climate change, we have to address the steam cracker emissions, and there we have, let's say, very high ambitions because we want to reduce 42% of our 2020 emissions until 2030. So that is really a big goal. And looking at 60% is coming out of the steam crackers, it is really an urgent thing. So that is in principle the part where we are looking the most to. How can we make this steam cracker decarbonization going? Steam crackers, I mentioned, are, let's say, big machines providing basic chemicals like ethylene, propylene, and to a wide range of the chemical value chain. So let's say a very diverse product offering, and for that reason also very diverse, of course, perception of consumers. What is a sustainable attribute of this plastic? So that's a bit, let's say, the challenge in which we are. Which we have to sort out, let's say, to make our decarbonization efforts also a profitable business.
So just to make sure we're clear on this, you obviously identified one of the topical issues these days, which is the plastics waste stream, and that's very much in the news. But if we come back to the question of carbon, of greenhouse gases, which is a slightly distinct problem, or distinct challenge. You have the energy that's used in your steam crackers is typically fossil fuels at the moment, almost entirely. And of course, you have as a feedstock, you use petrochemicals, and that's a separate issue here, right? You have a dual challenge in a way.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that we can solve the problem of the natural gas input typically or other fossil input through electrical crackers? That we have progress being made in this technology that could deal with a significant amount. Again, the electrical cracker would have to use carbon-free energy, but that's a problem we know how to solve.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that there's a significant pathway forward here, or is that maybe overblown, that the news we hear about electrical crackers is maybe 20 years away and people are making a big news about it?
No, I think our position is that we need different decarbonization levels. So there will not be one solution for all this, yeah. And
but that would be a big step forward if it actually worked.
Yes, of course.
At an economical price.
It's a very interesting technology. So there is, let's say, a competitor of us, let's say, with a big German technology provider, made very good progress. And we also think that there is technology which is, let's say, commercially at, let's say, smaller scales available, let's say, in the coming 5 to 10 years. So that electrical furnaces will be a part of the solution for steam crackers. However, let's say when you want to go quick and large, this technology is probably not one where you can see, okay, it will, let's say, replace the European steam cracker furnace fleet, let's say, in the next 10 years. That is probably will not be the case. So for that reason, we also have to look, how can we use technologies for drop-in solution with the existing assets. Ralph also mentioned that we have a strong asset base and are not, let's say, have the requirement to replace that tomorrow. So we have to find solutions how we can utilize that the best. And in that case, carbon capture plays a role in two senses. Eventually post-combustion carbon capture technology, but also pre-combustion carbon capture technology to produce low-carbon hydrogen and then to replace let's say, the methanes we burn in the furnaces by the hydrogen. So there are two angles of let's say, of a CCS usage here.
Right. Okay, well, that's very interesting. Katrine, let's come to you. How do you see this challenge? And also, remind everyone, your company famously made a transformation from being heavily fossil to not. Why is this a problem for you? Why is this a challenge you're taking up? As I understand it, you've made some recent investments in this area. What are you trying to prove here? Make everyone else look bad?
So I think asset is coming from a slightly different perspective. As you said, we have already decarbonized all of our own assets.
1 second. Can you hear her in the back? Can we turn up the microphone a little bit? Yeah.
How about now?
In the back row, can you hear her okay?
I see some...
Yeah, so. Let's get a handheld mic, please, if you don't mind coming up front, someone with a handheld mic. Let's keep talking in the meanwhile.
So we're coming from a slightly different angle, given that we have already decarbonized all of our own assets. So we see this as an opportunity to actually help expand the decarbonization efforts.
I think we're okay now. Thank you. Yeah.
Other corporates, basically. So we have biogenic powered combined power plants emitting biogenic CO2. So we see this as an opportunity. Basically, as a company, we are agnostic whether the CO2 goes to utilization or sequestration. That is a matter of demand from the market.
Do you have any demand for utilization?
We are starting to see demand for utilization, primarily driven by the Refuel EU Aviation and the Fuel EU Maritime The matter with utilization, especially for green fuels, is aligning the timelines. As we've heard earlier today, getting the FIDs and CODs synchronized is a major issue for the utilization business. So for the first round of project that we have coming online later this year, it will be a sequestration project where we are storing 430,000 tons of CO2 and have marketed and sold all of the credits in the voluntary carbon market. But I think the main issues that I see is going from individual projects to actually building an industry. So starting to build hubs, clusters, and common infrastructure that everyone can benefit from. So that's also something that Rystad now is starting to enable via building common CO2 infrastructure. We're looking into an onshore sequestration site together with our partners, Equinor in Denmark as well, and sort of expanding it from individual projects to building an industry. To do so, we need regulatory certainty and we need standardization. Standardization in terms of the molecule. What is the CO2 specification that we should all meet to enable that?
You had mentioned the project in Denmark. Is that the carbon capture and storage project I've heard about? Can you tell us just a little bit more about your involvement with that?
Yes, so we are installing a carbon capture on 2 of our large-scale combined power plants running on sustainable biomass. And combined, it will capture 430,000 tons coming online later this year. It will be transported from Denmark to Norway via ship and then stored in the Northern Lights offshore storage site.
So by ship at the moment, eventually pipeline, presumably, or will it always be by ship?
Yeah, a good question. For now, by ship. Hopefully, going forward, it will be able to be stored onshore in Denmark. We are looking into an onshore storage site right next to our own power plant. So that would be the natural transition to store it locally.
And how do the economics of this look at the moment? It sounds like an expensive way to do things.
It is, and the projects are currently enabled by the voluntary carbon market, but also very much via subsidies by the Danish government. And that's where we currently see a gap in the market. We're investing in heavy capital projects. We need long-term certainty to actually take FID on these projects. At the moment, we see some demand in the voluntary carbon market, but that needs to be bridged by government subsidies. And this is an interim solution, right? So to move to a fully sort of commercial market and more liquid market, you need the regulatory certainty to have more companies, whether that is utilization or the voluntary carbon market, to actually create that demand.
Well, these are all very interesting examples, but I'm still searching for that beautiful use case and the profitable business market for all of our carbon that we're coming up with. I'm hoping, Yve, you'll be able to be my savior here. Show me the way forward of how I can find this promised land where CO2 is no longer a problem to be dealt with, but rather this wonderful resource that can be monetized. Can you give us some hope? What would you like to tell us?
Happy to. Is my mic working? Yes.
You're good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I said happy to provide all the answers that you asked for here. So I'm here with Zero Emissions Platform, and so this is a platform that brings together very different stakeholders in the whole value chain of carbon capture and storage, and we specifically work on CCS, bioenergy with CCS, direct air capture with CCS, and also durable carbon utilization. So in the case where it ends up in products, for example, or materials where it will not be emitted back to the atmosphere. So the use cases that I will cover are from this perspective. Now, if we want to think, okay, what is going to be the solution? How will the solution look like? I think we should first think ahead to 2050 and what we expect to happen then. And what we will need to see by 2050 is that all the industrial products like the fertilizers, the cement and steel, these are all completely decarbonized, and we need to make it happen somehow. And I think in the context of what is happening right now in the EU, for example, we are expecting the new Green Industrial Deal. It is something that we hope will bridge the gap between the economic growth and then the decarbonization, so that we will create a demand for such products. So one of the obvious examples is getting the governments to walk the talk and start with public procurements of these decarbonized industrial products. And once we can get to scale this up, we will hopefully start seeing it's also being something, first of all, hopefully we get a bit cheaper as we do more of it. And then hopefully it will just become mainstream requirement for anyone who needs to build something to use decarbonized products.
How hopeful are you that this can happen in the next 5 years?
Well, I think we need to start maybe looking at the policy process, how long it takes. So if we have communication coming in at the end of this month, then hopefully there's going to be at some point a legislative proposal. It will take a few years to agree on. Maybe in 5 years' time, there are going to be some rules in place already. I think it's not excessively optimistic.
Okay, all right. Well, that's at least promising, and we're going in the right direction. We have an expert on stage, my final speaker. You're heading up the analysis of this topic at Rystad. Could you give us your perspective from the analytical side? Again, I know everybody's enthusiastic about sequestration, but I am interested in if we could think about some potential uses for utilization. Where do you see the potential market size or leading indicators?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Yvonne, and Rystad Energy is a company that provide data intelligence and advisory in the energy space. So our take on this, I'm going to just go a little bit away from the CCU discussions because the rest of the panel have talked about CCU. Just wanting to come to about CCS as well. So we can actually see the profitability from two perspectives. One is actually using CO2, so that's the taking it as a commodity. So you are selling the products, linking to a product, so you can actually have a green premium for it. And then another perspective of that, it's really a waste management. So waste management, for a lot of people, that they will think that, okay, this is not a very profitable business, right? But thinking about it is that every one of us is actually paying for waste management these days, right? So if the business is actually not profitable, why are we still seeing that people are still in this industry itself? So the answer is actually quite obvious that there is definitely ways that you can actually make it profitable. It's just the question of if there is a willingness to pay in there, right? So what we are seeing is that because it really depends on that country itself if they have a very prosperous or like the economic growth is actually very prosperous, because you will have to choose between putting food on the table versus managing waste and stuff like that. So it needs to start off from the developed countries, right? So from the developed countries, this is where you need to start on large scales and making it, putting it on the table so that this business could actually develop, make it a mandatory. And also at the same time, I just wanted to point out that a lot of people think that CCUS, it's only coming from the emitters perspective, but it's like other perspectives as well. You can actually offer that as a service. You can actually offer digital service for CCUS. You can actually even think about how you can monetize them in like many different ways. So what I'm trying to say here is that there is definitely ways that you can make it profitable, and people can be very creative. Business is always about like being creative, right? We have seen many different companies have many creative ways of making it profitable. So the answer to this is that yes, you can make it profitable, but you need to pick the right market that you go into with the right methodologies on how you are actually making it profitable.
So let me pick up on that last point, picking the right markets. When you look across the potential markets as they stand now and as they look like they could grow, whether we're looking at some form of fuels, synthetic fuels or e-fuels, if we look at the potential for being inputs into industrial processes, we can think about segregating maybe even into power, oil and gas itself. Which looks most promising? What can you give us some idea if you're an investor? Where should you think about investing, or what if you're looking for potential customers? Where do you see the most promise?
Yeah, so it really look into like which angle and perspective you are looking into, right? So according to our research, especially in Europe, so I'm particularly like pointing to like certain markets in here. If we are looking at Europe, we see that there's a lot of capture plants or emitters that's very eager to capture the CO2. But currently, we don't really have the infrastructure in place. So the TNS part is really missing. So supply and demand balances, everyone knows about it, right? Then in that case, in the future, when these TNS is not coming along, and then when licenses, for example, is actually not giving fast enough, then you will come into a problem where the TNS is actually not available when it needs to be stored. So in that case, there is actually two choices. Either you delay the projects or you actually pay a more hefty price to it. Now, when you are paying more hefty price to it, at the end of the day, this cost is going to pass down to consumer. That means me, you, and every one of us that is in this hall, right? Now the question is like, even if we are not willing to pay for it, do you really have a choice? Right. So the question here is like, do you really have a choice? So for example, if we are already willing to pay when it's so expensive on the power price now because of the supply and demand going imbalance, right? Then in that case, why is that a problem when this cost is actually putting into the utility price? It's passing down to the consumers. So it's actually quite a similar perspective in here. So it depends on, do you have a choice? So if you are in, for example, like productions industry, which only have a few niche players in there, which dominate the industry, then in that case, when you don't really have a choice, there is a high possibility you can actually pass it down to the consumer because there's no other choices in there. But of course, then we will have an inflation. And this inflation is not something new. I think like every one of us experienced inflation before. So I think like this is something that has been like, overly debated in the sense that like when it comes to inflations, everything will actually like go around it as well, right? So in that case, if a country is actually not really suffering too much in terms of getting the basics on the table, then in that case, there is a considerations for decarbonizations technologies as well.
Interesting. Now, I want to come to the audience in just a moment for some questions, so please collect your thoughts. And also, I want to say, I know a lot of people are standing in the back. We have plenty of seats in the front. Please make your way forward. Don't be shy. And those of you in the front, squeeze in a little bit. Allow our shy people in the back who've been standing so patiently. Come on up. We don't bite up here, at least not yet. We'll see during the Q&A what your questions are. Before I turn to the audience, I want to come to Rose. I had a question for you. I noticed that you have a very cool title. Part of your title is you are the global head of the plants of tomorrow, something like that. And I thought, wow, someone who's already living in the future. So I wanted to ask you, since this is one of the only conferences I've been to in the last 12 to 18 months where the words artificial intelligence have yet to be uttered, at least on any session that I've been on. And I'm wondering, it seems like we're all part of the, technology of yesterday, and here's a woman here from the future. Can you tell us what role at your company you're finding AI is playing? I've read in some write-up somewhere that your AI optimized operations have reduced emissions considerably. So I'm just curious to know, since we haven't really talked about it much, can you just give us a little flavor of what people can achieve?
So let me try to explain this in the language of this conference, right?
Use small words. We're from the past. We have to keep up with you.
Marginal abatement cost curve. Right? If you're looking at an industrial and you want to abate your CO2, where do you start? You start at the beginning of your marginal abatement cost curve. How can I reduce CO2 and make money at the same time? And typically, I'm not going to say this is the case on all these harder to abate, possible to abate industries, but typically carbon capture is right the way down at the other end. So where should you be starting? You should definitely be starting with the avoidance. Now, where can you do that really well? Where is the business case? Frankly, obvious. It's obvious with the deployment of digital solutions and technologies. It's obvious where you can leverage AI in order to do things like process optimization. Don't run the mill when you know the power is coming from the coal-fired power station. Run the mill when you know you've got wind on full, in the North Sea. Run then. Things like that are hard to program into the old-fashioned control system, but very easy for an AI that's embedded into it to operate. So I come back to the marginal abatement cost curve. We talk about carbon capture in the cement industry. It's at the end of that list. We must be doing everything before it first before we get there. It's an and, not an or. And AI is very much part of the architecture, I believe, of every single physical operational site for process industries.
And of course, when we talk about AI in this example, we're talking machine learning, which has been around forever. We're not talking about the new LLMs and all of the questions that are coming up, although those may well be very useful as well.
Certainly
Am I right?
they are. Certainly they are.
But the evidence that I've seen from your operations is using conventional machine learning.
Conventional machine learning applied for the first time in a process industry. That hasn't been done before, and it actually requires a little bit of generative in order for that to work well.
Right? Okay.
And now with generative, you might be familiar with the pharma industry, not to go on a big tangent, but there they are generating proposals for new molecules without having to go into physical chemical testing.
Right.
The same is the case in the materials industry. The same is the case for all of these materials. We can find novel and interesting new materials that will perform at low or no CO2, and we can use generative AI to help on that journey. It's not the solution, but it is an accelerant.
Yeah, that's very well put. And of course, with novel battery materials, there's a lot of enthusiasm and research into that area with adsorbents for carbon capture. Some of you will be involved with this. Actually, let me get a show of hands. Are any of you at companies or institutions that are actively using AI ML in this way and seeing any kind of results already? Hands up. Okay. All right. Well, come see me later. I'm curious to follow up on this. I don't want to deviate us too much off track here, but I'm keen to follow up on that. Let's turn to questions for our panel, since we have a little bit of time. On the idea, again, let's try to get back to the idea of how do you make money from this, rather than simply seeing it as a money suck or a massive subsidy hoarder. Does anyone have a provocation from the floor or a challenge to our experts on stage here? Let's see it. The question in the back. Let's get a microphone to the person in the back. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Hello. Good afternoon, Eka from Toyota Pushaku. I have a question. When I'm listening to this carbon capture concept, I see that most of the projects are done in Europe and North America. But then I'm thinking, how do you guys select the location when you implement this facility? I'm thinking about developing countries. There are many countries and cities struggling with air pollution. And at the same time, if we implement such projects in those countries, those cities, with low construction running costs, we achieve, or Europe achieves CO2 reduction. Those cities, those countries also achieve air pollution. Seems like both can win. Or am I missing something in this?
Okay. Yeah, we get the sense of your question. Who wants to take that on? Anybody have a perspective on?
Probably one explanation why we are concentrating on Europe and the US, because let's say our industries at least have a very, very high capital intense asset base in this region. So production, but also the markets. So we serve these markets, and for that reason, of course, let's say we have first the responsibility to obey there and to reduce carbon emissions there where we operate. Yeah. Of course, let's say we're also working, of course, in other regions, doing investments there. But it's of course focus where our products, let's say, go to a market and how can we bring these products to a market. That is the reason why we as a company, and the cement industry is also a very capital intense industry, which you cannot move, let's say, from left to right quickly. So that I would say that is the reason why we are focusing on the locations and the regions where we operate today.
If I can add on that, it's not just about where we focus, right? It's about where we focus now and what we will be focused on later. What we're not saying is that we're going to start with a couple and then we're going to sit back and have a nice time. No, we're trying to prove that this is a scalable solution. We're trying to prove in our first flagships that this is possible, the technology exists, we're aware of the risks and we can manage them. And if we can do that in a European market where we have all of these pushes and pulls to make it happen now, then we can come to a solution that is something that we can scale globally. And that is a commitment that we have also made with the United Nations to push the scaling, and that has to come as well.
Just on this, I think you wanted to come in on this point? Yeah.
Yes.
And then we'll go to the front row.
To highlight that actually, yes, we talk a lot about CCS in EU and US, but globally, we know that basically half of it should be happening in developing countries. That's the reality. That's what the IEA analysis has shown. And one thing is that it should be happening there, and we know that many countries, especially in Asia, are looking at it already. But something that doesn't come up in this context when you ask corporates about where you're doing it is that we also need the governments to put in place the right frameworks to be able to actually do it, so that there's legislation for the transport and storage, for permitting, and all of that. Without that, even if you're a corporate and you want to do it, you cannot do it. So we also need to make that happen.
Yeah, and we're going to have a speaker from Indonesia on one of my later sessions this afternoon. You can hear more about that. And of course, I point out to you in Malaysia, Petronas, the national oil company, has an explicit strategy to become not only advanced in CCS, but to become a regional hub, almost like a Northern Lights equivalent for that region, if it has favorable geography and depleted reservoirs and so on. So we are beginning to see some of these advances. But good question, why not more? In the front row, we have a microphone, please.
Dmitry Tsetkov, CFO of Nexo Power UK. Vijay, you wanted some provocative questions.
Yes,
I'd like
please.
to challenge the topic. It's not just about being profitable, it's also creating value. We have a perfect example of Rystad, which converted itself from an oil and gas company and created huge value for shareholders, for society, and so on. So the question primarily for Rose and for Wilfred, in terms of your KPIs for profitability, do you have something related to only profitability, or you have something related to value creation? And second part of the question, do you have a lot of pressures and demands from your customers to decarbonize your products? Because that could be one of the ways to create value rather than just to focus on profit. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, when I can give some remarks to that. Yes, of course, we have, let's say, investment criteria also for our sustainability project. So they are on a global scale, of course, competing with conventional investments. But we have about, let's say, in the actual years, in the next years, about 20% of our capital investments going into sustainability projects, be it decarbonization, be it recycling projects. So that is a quite large share. And of course, this market pull from the customer side is there's a strong element which drives these investments. So we actually, let's say, investing in our vesseling side in Germany into a new technology for chemical recycling, and own technology from, let's say, invented in our company. So we're really thinking that we have let's say, a very significant step forward in chemical recycling there. And that are investments which we're doing in Europe, because Europe provides this market which has the sensitivity for these kind of products, and that is very important. And why we are, let's say, confident that this project will be a success, because we have two elements, on the recycling, on the circularity part. We have legislation and regulation which tells us, okay, when you go into packaging, for example, in 2030, you need a certain recycled content in packaging. So that is a must. There's a mandate which have to be there in Europe. And so the market has to respond to that. So that gives a clear case for us to invest in that. On the other side, we have also, of course, a lot of work to have a collaboration with the brand owners who tell us, okay, we have only a scope-free claim. We want to provide this and that to our customers. How can we solve that? Yeah. And so for doing that, we are developing, let's say, the circular strategy of us, chemical recycling, which makes a drop-in feedstock in our steam crackers, but also mechanical recycling, because that is, let's say, a more efficient way to recycle what is easier to recycle. So that is our strategy on that, and that I think that explains a bit the two things. Yes, there is clear investment criteria for this project and competing with conventional, but yes, there is also for circular projects, let's say, a market outlook and a belief that that is the right thing to do. When we look now to decarbonization and to the decarbonization project, then we also see the sensitivity on the brand owner side. We see actually too less on the regulation side, which drives, let's say, the mandates for, let's say, for low carbon produced plastics in the market. So that is a gap which we see there. And another challenge on that is chemical recycling. You can drop in your feedstocks into your steam cracker, so you can scale to the market. If you go and want to decarbonize such a steam cracker, you do everything in one go. Yeah, so for that reason, it's another supply side of these kind of projects, and for that reason, that is a challenge we are facing there, and for which we are also advocating on change of custody, mass balance, PCF methodologies, which are very important that we can transport these sustainability attributes to our customers.
Rose, you wanted to come in. A quick point as we're winding up
Very
here?
quick one, yes. Just around, do we have the market pull? In theory, yes, but what would really help? What would really help was the focus on not push tactics, but pull. Pull into utilization, pull into creating new markets, pull into what the future of exactly the ETS and the CBAM will look like, but not just on the push side, on what is it going to look like in the hands of the invoice that a customer is going to be receiving. Everything that is being done legislatively and on the free market to support the utilization markets and to support generating that market is time well spent and will do a tremendous amount to help businesses like ours make the moves today.
Yeah.
Well stated. And right on time, we finish up. Please give my panelists a nice round of applause.